Okay, welcome to the second lesson. Let's get started. Do we have any open questions that we have to discuss? Any things that I didn't describe properly? Any loose ends? No? Okay. It wasn't that complicated in the first lesson. It was just more or less discussing the process of doing grid layouts and things like that, and I hope that was rather okay and fine for you to understand. The next thing that we are going to do is we are going to add some styling. Let's create some styling, and I hope you can remember that. I will show it to you, and it's a repetition from last time. Can you remember last time we added styles by here using the property element syntax window.resources, and then we can add styles here. And I came up with a bunch of styles, and let's start with the first two styles for the text block, because we need this hero text block, the name of the car, and then we need the description text block where we have the description below, which is a little bit smaller in terms of font size. A style has two important properties. We had that last time. The target type, in this case we say text block, and a key. X:key, and let's call it the hero style. Hero should become this style here. You see this large font, the hero text. And if you can remember last time, you define a setter with the property, and let's start with the font size and the value. In our case, I came up with a value of 60. And the second thing, if you take a look at our styling here, this will be the cell, so we need to make sure that the text is aligned at the bottom of the cell. We don't want to have the text up here, we want to have the text down here. Therefore, we add a second setter property, and this is called vertical alignment, and the value should be bottom. Not very complicated. See? Style, remember, define a target type, give it a key, and then define the properties and the values. If you use Visual Studio, you really get nice IntelliSense, so it's not difficult to set up the styles. The difficult thing is coming up with the concrete values. Do you want to have a size of 60 or 50 or 40, or what do you want to have? Yeah, that's not a trivial thing to do, but yeah, that's more user interface design. Now if we go down here to our text block, can anybody remember how we can now reference the style that we have defined just right now inside of our text block? How did we do that? With a so-called markup extension. So what we can write is we can say style equals to markup extension static resource, and you see, you get the hero and you just select it. And if we go into our app, you see that we now have a beautiful Ferrari now here, exactly at the right position, exactly with the right font. Got it? That was a quick repetition from last time. Let's do the second style. I will just copy this style, copy, and I ask you to do the same, paste. But this time we will not call it hero, but we will call it description. The font size should be a little smaller, 15. The vertical alignment shouldn't be bottom, but top. And last but not least, I would like to have third property here, the so-called text wrapping, and that should be wrap. So if the text is too long, it should float over to the next line, to the next line, to the next line. Okay? Well, and then it's just a repetition again. If we go to the text, we do exactly what we did before. Style, use a markup extension, and reference the description. That's it. If you did it correctly, you should now see the text floating wrapping here. Here you see the text wrapping properly designed. Next one is the border here. Let's remove the background chartreuse here. We don't want to have that one. Let's design the border where the car is displayed. The border should contain a background image. But we will use a technique which is called a tiled image. Do you know what a tiled image is? Very common in user interface design, also in game design. Tiles are in German Fliesen. Okay? So you take an image and the image is designed so that you can combine it over and over and over. And with that you can fill a large wall, space, whatever, with relatively small tiles. And in my case, I came up with a nice tile that is a water design, and this tile is built so that you can really use it as a tile. So it's compatible top to bottom, left to right. Okay? And I will show you how you can do a tile fill in XAML. Of course, the same is true in any design system, in any CSS styling also supports things like that. This tile technique, tile brushes, are available in any user interface. So let's define a style for the target type border. Again, let's give it a key, and I suggest that the key should be car, because that is the style that we want to have. If we take a look at our styling here, I will zoom in a little bit. If you take a look very closely, then you will see that we have a little bit of a margin here, you see? And we additionally have a little bit of a padding here, you see? Because the car is not up here and the water is not going right to the bottom. So this one is outside of the border, therefore we are going to use a margin here. And the second one here is inside the water, therefore we are going to use the padding here. Margin is outside, padding is inside, okay? Again, not XAML specific, works exactly the same in all other languages too. So let's define a setter with the property, define the margin, and I already came up with a margin which I liked. So we define the value for 00250. If you would do that on your own, you would need to come up with your own values. But in this case, I sat down yesterday and came up with values that I liked. If you want to change it, change it. The second setter is the padding. And the padding should be 10. At least in my scenario. Did something change? No, because we don't have any image yet. And now comes the interesting part. Now comes something new, so listen closely because that is important. I would like, in the styling, define a setter for the property background. Value equals 2, and you could now think of that it would be possible to define some URL to a JPEG file, for instance. This does not work. Because what you see here is not a brush. For the background, we need a brush. This is not a brush. It's a text. It's a URL. XAML, in this case, doesn't know that it should take the text and turn it into a brush by loading the image and making a tile brush out of it. It doesn't work like that. So here we need to somehow specify a brush. But the problem is that a brush doesn't have a text representation. I cannot write a text content here to specify a brush. A brush is a complex object. A brush might be a solid brush or a tile brush, has certain properties, has the URL. So this doesn't work. And last time I already showed you a syntax with which you can define a complex object as a property value. Okay, that's a little hard to understand. The problem is that I can't express what I want to have in a text format. So therefore I cannot use the property syntax as we see it here. So I have to delete that one and use the following syntax, setter.value, and then I can use a complex object, in my case an image brush, as the value of the property. That's not trivial. We had it last time, but it was pretty fast last time, so I wanted to repeat it again. The correct name in XAML for this technology is called property element syntax. Why? Because it's a property, but we're using the XML element syntax to define the property value. Got it? That is why it's called a property element syntax. It's a pretty nice trick. What does that? Yeah, question.
Eva heißt da. Christoph, mal wieder.
Ah, yeah, okay, I have to fix that. Yep, I will make a mental note and I will fix that before the next break. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, danke.
Good. Now the image brush has an image source, and luckily we can define the URL here. You do not need to type in the URL because I already published that for you. So let me quickly copy that into Discord. Here is the URL. Copy that one. Where is it? Here is it. No. Here. No. That is the correct one. Give me a second. I will copy it into Discord. You can copy it from there. And then we need to define a few properties which I will just tell you. It's not that important. It's nothing conceptually new here. What we can do is we can say tile mode tile. That means fließen in German. So put one tile after the other depending on the size that you need. Stretch equals none. Do not resize the image. That means do not resize the image. Then we have to define how large the image is. It should start at the at the upper left corner, and the size of the image is 512 pixels. And the viewport units is absolute. Don't worry about that. Just believe me, it's a good value. It's not that important. You can read the details about these view properties, these four properties in the documentation. For now, it should work nicely. The important thing is this property element syntax, not so much the details of a tile brush. So what's missing? Here I have the style. Here I have the border. What do I have to do next? Yes, reference the style. Static resource, car. And if we did everything correctly, we see, we see water. Good. And if I make it very large, if you take a very close look, you will see that there is tiling going on here. You see that one? You see small graphical artifacts, but they are really subtle, so it's perfectly fine. The image does its magic, it works properly. By the way, do you think that I painted that myself? Of course not. There is a really nice website which I would like to show you. Maybe you know it already. It's called craftpix.net. There are many sites like that. What they essentially offer is they offer game assets. And if you take a look at freebies, you will see many freebies like that. And if you go to game kits, for instance, there is a racing game kit for free. And guess what? Here you can find cars. These cars have different designs. Some of them are broken, some of them are not. You see, you have houses, you have design elements for level items, you have curves and things like that. And you can download those things for free. So if you want to do some practicing and you want to build very simple 2D games, or you need just some graphical assets, I don't know, small figures running around on a landscape or something like this, companies and websites like CraftPix are really great. And even the commercial game kits are not expensive. You pay 5 or 10 or 15 euro and you get really, really powerful game kits. Some of them even have a 2D skeleton where you can generate your own animations with physically correct animations of the characters and things like that, and it's really nice. It's just one website, which I particularly like, but there are more websites like that on the internet. And yeah, if you want to build something nice, take a look at websites like that. Okay, nice. We now have a design. Let me quickly check my notes. If I forgot something, we can now get started with data binding, okay? The next thing that we want to do is we really want to replace the static text that you see here with text coming from our application logic. So I ask you to delete this text, this static text, and also delete this static text, the quick brown fox and so on, because now we want to add logic. Now we enter a new world, a new field in XAML, and that is data binding, and that will keep us busy until the end of this lesson, okay? I came up with a bunch of demo data, which I would like to copy into your Discord server now. Let me quickly grab this code for you. This is the code that I would like to copy for you. Additionally, we need a little small class named car, and it doesn't pay off to type that by hand, so I will give you this class again through Discord. You can copy the class car into your application. I will create a new file in my solution, but you can put it in the same file just as you like. Car. And I will place my class here. Very, very simple class. Nothing special. And now your application should compile successfully. Please try to copy the code snippets that I gave you and try to build your application and make sure that it builds successfully. I will wait a few more moments until everybody could catch up. The rest of the code we will write by hand. But this is just demo data and a very simple data transfer object, so therefore no need to spend time typing this stuff. Don't forget, you don't get hot reloading with C#. You only get hot reloading with XAML. So if you want to see your changes in C# in your running application, you have to stop and restart the app. I would like to display the currently selected car in my text blocks. That's the first thing that I would like to do. Now, the code that you copied in, which I gave you, gives you a list of demo cars. You see, in this list, we have the Ferrari, the police car, and the Lamborghini. They're in the list of cars. You see it here. So what I would like you to add is I would like you to add a property of type car, and let's call it the current car. That is the currently selected car. This property will change. If I click on next, the current car will change. If I click on previous, the current car will change. So the current car is a reference into our list of cars and points to the car which is currently selected. I think you get the idea, right? At the very beginning, in the constructor, we would like to set the current car to cars 0. So the first car in the list should be our current car when the application starts. Shouldn't be complex for you to understand, should be pretty clear. And now comes the interesting part. How do we get the value of the current car, and especially the value of the title and description? I think it was called name, not title. Yes, name and description. How do we get that into our XAML? Well, it's not that difficult. Please go into the XAML code here. And here we can say text. And now comes the important part. Please listen closely. We will practice that over and over and over again. It's important. Again, a markup extension, then we will use binding. Last time, we already did a binding. It was the label. Can you remember? We had a binding where we connected the label to the text box. But today we are going to bind our user interface to our C# code. Similar to a binding that you did in Angular, for instance. The problem here is, well, we can say binding name. If we do that, and if we run the application, nothing will change. See? Binding name, no name at all. Of course not. Of course, we did a mistake here. We should really say current car dot name. Get it? Because the name is of the current car. If I run it again, nothing has changed. See it? Still doesn't work. The problem is, and now comes the important part. Try to follow along in your mind. Try to understand what I'm going to tell you now. The problem is that WPF doesn't know where to look for this one here. It doesn't know where current car should be. Is it the property of text block? Is it a property of the window where the text block is in? Or maybe the grid where the text block is in? It has no idea where to look for current car. We have to give it a kind of context. A context where we tell WPF, hey WPF, every binding is relative to this context. This is the context for all the bindings. And this is a single line of code that is super important, and I will ask you to write it over and over again in the upcoming months. Inside of the constructor, please write data context equal this. Now, this just refers to our main window. But the point is that the current car is part of this main window. Get it? So with this single line, we essentially tell WPF, hey, whenever you see a binding, look for the reference properties in this object. Because current car is part of this. Understood? At least a little bit? Okay? Good, good, good. If I run it, let's see what's going to happen. Oh my god, I see Ferrari. Data binding works. Woohoo! I have one tip for you. Now this is kind of useful. Don't change your code anymore because it works. Take a look at my screen, okay? If I delete this one here, and I start to type, see? Current car, I don't get IntelliSense, see it? Because XAML doesn't know what's going on here in C#. It doesn't understand that in C# the data context is set, and therefore it cannot help me while typing the name of a property. Because it can never find a list of properties because it has no idea about C#. There is a trick. You do not absolutely need to remember it, but you can if you want. I have it in the sample code that is already in your repository, and I will copy it in, and if you want, you can try it on your own. If you want to use this code, put the code into the window starting element. Here, you put this code in. And with this code, you tell XAML that while editing XAML in Visual Studio, it should look for the main window as its data context. It's the so-called design time data context. It's the data context that the XAML designer uses while typing in code. this will be ignored during runtime. This has no effect when running the code. It's only a support for you while you are writing or designing your XAML. Because if you specify the design data context here, suddenly something very interesting happens. If I remove that one, see that one? I get IntelliSense. See it? Enter, dot, see it? IntelliSense. Nice, isn't it? Name. I cannot make typing mistakes anymore. So this design time data context is kind of useful if you want to or if you have to write more XAML code. It's not a must. It's perfectly fine to remove it, but it is really, really useful. Got it so far? Fine? Well, then let's add the second binding for the description. Text equals binding current car dot description. That will be the second binding. And the last binding is our car image. So we can define here in source. That would be the URL. Therefore, again, a binding with current car and URL. These three bindings we have. Text binding, image source binding. If you did everything correctly, and if you run your app, you should now hopefully see Ferrari, a description. We should see the car just as we expected it to see. Once you worked through it and once you really understood how this binding works, the two most important things are set the data context like this, define the properties like that, and then use the markup extension binding to do the data binding, and you're done. Fine. This is not a perfect solution, don't get me wrong. There is lots of room for improvement, and in the next lesson we will find out that our solution currently has a very severe bug. We will have to fix that bug, but I will show you that in the next lesson. For this lesson, we fulfilled our target. We have learned the basics of data binding, data context, markup extension, binding. I will repeat that over and over again so that you will remember it, and you will definitely need that in your next exam. Okay, so this is something that you have to get used to. Good. If we don't have any further question for this lesson, I would like to close this lesson now because we have a break in about 2 minutes. So we are perfectly in time, and we will continue at 10. And yeah, then we will go into more elaborate scenarios for data binding. We will do two-way data binding. We will fill our combo box. We will fix some bugs that our current application has. Let me surprise you. Okay? See you in 15 minutes.